Well, we are here today with one of my, I think, very close friends, Dan Eisens. He works with us here at Simantel, and he and I got to know each other how long ago? 10 plus years?
10 years now, yeah.
We met each other at Confab, which is a content strategy conference, and Dan and I think I attended your workshop day one, and I was fascinated with all the things you do. And over the years, I have learned you are a CX strategist, a content strategist, a journalist by trade. So give us your background. Tell our listeners a little bit about how you came up in the world.
Yeah, so I started in journalism, to your point. Loved hearing other people's stories, and I think that's been a big thread in my career. I love the research part of it, the thinking part of it. And then kind of fell into advertising, specifically on the digital side, because I was just one of those weird digital geeks that was open to doing just about any job. And that led me into information architecture, which is super research focused, content strategy, then doing larger strategy projects where I got into more of the planning side of things. So I got to hear people's stories again and do audience analysis and things like that. And for the last 2 years, I've been full-time at Simantel. Worked with you guys about 9 years after that initial little workshop and started on my own. So it's coming up on 9 years of partnership and building relationships
That's awesome.
with you guys. And that's been great. And my most recent effort, I'm kind of back to school right now, and I'm studying foresight at the University of Houston and applying that to my work. Its goal really was to think about looking at all these different trends and all these different things that happen, but not to really accurately predict the future, but to think about what are the potential scenarios that we could end up in. So there's an entire foresight activation model that they think about. It's the foresight framework. It thinks about things from framing, scanning, forecasting, and futuring, which is where you're actively trying to design and think about what the potential futures could look like based on whatever timeline you're assigning to the work or the problem that you're thinking of. Visioning, and then planning, and then acting or activating on the future. That's kind of the exciting part to me. I just spent the last 7 weeks in a pretty intensive course on activating the future. And what I love about that is that it's not just trying to think of what could happen, not just projecting the doom and gloom or thinking about, what might occur if collapse happens. It's really impacting futures thinking in your everyday. So if you know what all of your potential futures could be, you can always be prepared for it. And I think that's where the big opportunity space is for the clients that we work with, because you can think about you can actually look at things happening in real time and saying change actually happens really slow when you look at it over a 30, 40, 50-year timeline. But at the end of the day, if you are actively living in futures thinking every single day, then you're never going to be behind the curve,
right?
Because you're always going to be ready for the new what's next. Change always feels fast when you're in it, but it really moves in patterns. I think if you really do pay attention to things that have happened in the past and how things have started to evolve, and you look for the signals, we call that scanning in foresight work, right? If you're scanning the horizon for things that are happening even in your everyday, like it could be a new sign, it could be a small update to technology, or it could be some other weird new traffic pattern that you see happening because there's different cameras installed and things like that. You can start to predict, where change might occur. You might not be absolutely right, but you can have enough assumptions about it to feel like you're probably, me in the 80-20 rule, that I'm about 80% right, that I'm 80% confident that something like this is probably going to happen. And I never want to be a futurist that accurately predicts like a pandemic or a major, economic collapse. But I do want to be prepared for anything. And I think that's the real beauty of foresight work, is that you can start to, accurately predict if you really just start paying attention to the signals and tracking them and looking for patterns and trends.
How would you say your consulting skills have evolved through those years in terms of your approach and your methodologies? And how is this new futuristic thinking and foresight work that you're studying going to influence that even more?
Wow, that's a great question. I think in my younger years in strategy, it's probably a little bit bolder and brasher and thinking, the sole role of a strategist is to be provocative and to think of a different idea. I still believe that to a point, but now as I've studied more foresight work, realizing how everything is really interconnected in a much bigger way, where I used to think the story and the data I was collecting was sort of my source of truth. The source of truth, when you think about things from a foresight and futures perspective, which is really the study of change, is that everything runs in different cycles and everything is really truly interconnected.
That's so cool.
So I really approach strategy in a different way. And even when I think about a client problem or opportunity that they bring to us, I'm thinking much more about the steep factors. What's the social, the technological, the environmental, the political, and the economic factors that impact their business, but not just their business, like their entire reason for being. So when you can think about it that way and project out 20, 30, 40 years, what are the potential scenarios that they might find themselves in? A lot of the work that we do at Simantel, particularly the way that we work at Simantel, where we're having deep relationships, thinking very deeply about our clients, really trying to build a long-term relationship, that's futures work in its own right, because you're thinking about the past, you're looking at everything that might be impacting the present. Like, there's really a few horizons that foresight thinks about. It's the baseline. What is the potential transformation scenario? What happens if we go into collapse, right? And then what is new equilibrium on the other side? So when you think about foresight work, you're constantly thinking about not necessarily what is, but what if.
Right.
And that's big in our business. And when you really think about some of the clients that we work with, how tied they are to things like supply chains, or how tied they are to things like tariffs, or how tied they are to different political things that could be happening in the world, their business can change at any minute.
Right.
So we have to be ready to pivot. But bringing like that futures thinking work to the forefront really gives them an opportunity to pivot what they use their budget on, pivot how they work with us, or even think about the things that we offer to them.
How do you get a client to be able to think that big and that brave? I mean, you've done workshops for years and you always have helped clients assess trade-offs related to their intended outcomes. Yeah. How does this work start to shift that into an even bigger space and longer term? Yeah,
so I think honestly, that's one of the closest in that impact mapping, which is kind of where I think you're going with.
One of my favorite exercises.
Yeah. So that's intended outcomes in a big way. That aligns so nicely with futures work.
Okay.
Because it allows you to not only prioritize what you think the right answer might be, or you can get everything out on the table that way. So I love doing that exercise with clients because you don't go in necessarily with a preconceived notion. You go in with an outcome, right? I want to earn an additional $26 million in part sales in the next year, right? Okay, I could think of a lot of different behaviors that would need to change for a large customer in order to make that happen. But if I'm not looking at all the other potential outside factors, outside of what you think you can control with channel and everything else, you might not be really scratching the surface in the right direction. So, and the thing that I love about impact mapping is it forces us into abandoning our assumptions and thinking more about certainties and learning where that data is coming from. I'm confident that this is going to happen because I have extrapolated that from data, or are you really just trying to confirm assumptions? And if you can get people in that space, then they're outside of their own immediate goals and they're thinking about the rest of the world around them in a different way.
Well, what's a piece of advice?
I think, honestly, it's super simple. I think it's just being curious. Like, that's my favorite thing to tell people to be. Like, two things, really. One, be curious, and two, be where you are. I've recently started saying be where you are to my kids a lot, who have been very critical of themselves as they have advanced in education and they're doing more sports. It was something I wish more people told me to be when I was younger. And I say it to clients too. It's okay to be where you are and realize that this is where you're at on the road. And that's also where the foresight stuff comes in too. You can look at all the places you could be, but don't try and predict where you have to be. Just be ready to pivot based on what starts to happen. And if you can be a little bit ready for anything, you're going to be just fine. So if you can be where you are and know what's challenging you or what's affecting you, you have all the tools you need to go where you need to go.